Welcome to the Flying Octopus Podcast, offering a new perspective on Red Wings hockey, as well as all the important news from around the NHL. And now, here are your hosts, Tony Wolak, Devin Little, and Evan Sabrin.
Today is the post-playoffs injury report edition of the Flying Octopus Podcast. Tony is sick. I'm 2 hours removed from a root canal surgery, and Devin is on vacation. So those are our versions of a torn labrum or a broken foot as we navigate through this show today. With that said, welcome to episode 39 of the Flying Octopus Podcast. I am your host, Evan Sabrin, joined by my cohort, Tony Wolak. On today's show, we'll discuss some of the Red Wings' in-house free agents and predict their future, as well as what their contracts could look like heading into next season. Like I said, Devin is not with us today, but he still managed to put out his prospect profile, and we'll look at Cole Reschny, a 5'10 forward who played last season with the Victoria Royals of the WHL, now committed to North Dakota. He put up 92 points in 62 games there last season. Feels like his name has been moving up the draft boards a lot, so Devin's going to break him down for everyone today. We'll also hit on some news and notes. The Red Wings signed another goaltender within the organization. We'll discuss what that means. And there's also some more news on Dmitri Buchelnikov's situation with the KHL, and Tony's going to break that down for you. We'll also talk about some potential trade targets for Detroit this summer that we saw hit the rumor mill since we last talked, and Tony has some good stuff there. And last but not least, Vladimir Tarasenko. Will he be on the team this fall? We'll break that down and more. First, let me remind you where you can find us. iTunes and Spotify or wherever you get your podcast. Let's follow us on Twitter at Flying Octopod. You can also follow our YouTube channel at The Flying Octopod. Tony, let's get into it real quickly here now with the free agent situations. We've got four guys we're going to hit on today: Jonatan Berggren, Albert Johansson, Elmer Soderblom, and Patrick Kane. The first three are all restricted free agents. Patrick Kane is not. But let's start with Berggren. The 24-year-old winger was a second-round pick in 2018. This is now his seventh season with the organization, and man, if that doesn't say time flies. He's played 154 games over the past three seasons in the wing wheel, tallying 58 points with 29 goals and 29 assists. He had 24 points this past season in 67 games, 12 goals, 12 assists. Berggren's always been a polarizing player for Detroit. He's also a player who could be moved over the summer. I'm curious, Tony, if you think he's part of the long-term plan with this team, or is he a candidate that could be moved shortly here? Like, to me, he kind of fits the profile of someone who could use a fresh start with another organization. If not, what do you think his contract could look like heading into the 25-26 season?
I mean, I think he's a useful depth piece. Is he going to be one of the leaders on the team moving into the future? No, probably not. But that's not to say, he couldn't be useful for the organization. Now, I think going into this past season, he and the Red Wings probably were expecting bigger things. Berggren signed a 1-year prove-it contract during last offseason just to go out and show that he can be a true NHL player, put up middle 6 points, and, parlay that into a much bigger contract. The problem with that, though, was Marco Kasper burst onto the scene and took Berggren's special teams time, took over in the top six, where he could have possibly had a shot. So that gamble did not pay off. Now, what does that mean for the future? So I definitely think he's I don't know if I even call him a trade chip, because I don't think his trade value is super high, but he is a potential player to be moved. He, like you mentioned with his stats, like he has a 15-goal campaign and a 12-goal campaign in his 2 full seasons with the Red Wings. There's something there for sure. It's just he hasn't taken it to the next level yet. Obviously, there's still time. He's still pretty young. He's 24, turns 25 in July. So if the Red Wings want to move him, I don't know if they're going to get a whole lot of value. He's certainly not going to be the centerpiece in a trade for a better player, but could he benefit from a change of scenery? Sure. Could he benefit from a fresh start in a fresh season with the Red Wings? Sure. It all depends on what the Red Wings want to do this summer on the trade front. That's something we've covered extensively already. But as far as his next contract goes, so when I ran my model on Berggren, one player kept coming up, and that was Jesper Boquist of the Florida Panthers. He is probably their 12th or 13th forward right now as the team is in the finals. They had very similar seasons historically. I think Boquist is a little older, but not by much. They are certainly comparable players. And Boquist just signed a 2-year, $1.5 million AAV contract extension with the Panthers in March. And so I look at that and I see how him and Berggren are almost interchangeable. And I'm using that as an anchoring point. 2 years, $1.5 million. He'll be a restricted free agent when that contract is over. And, then the Red Wings can kind of decide what his future looks like at that point. Now, if you look at what the Red Wings did with Joe Veleno after he signed his 1-year prove-it contract and had a decent season, he signed a 2-year deal that was a little over $2 million. I don't know if Berggren has earned that money, and I think Veleno mostly got that because he was a center, could kill penalties and play up and down the lineup. Berggren doesn't quite have that same flexibility as well, but again, I'm using that 2-year, $1.5 million contract as an anchoring point. If the Red Wings can get him for less, great. If he signs for a little more, well, good for Berggren and his agent. Key takeaway here is that it shouldn't cost too much to re-sign him. And it's possible that he takes another 1-year deal again to try to prove yet again that he's a full-time NHL player and he can put up, 40 or so points. But I think a 2-year, $1.5 million deal would probably be good for both parties there.
I'm not sure how the organization views him as a long-term piece. And like I said, I wouldn't be shocked to see him moved this summer or possibly in a deal, maybe even at the draft, just because it just seems like he's the candidate, the kind of guy who needs a fresh start somewhere, because it just doesn't feel like he's really fit in with this organization. It'll be interesting to see what happens with him moving forward. Moving on to the next guy, Albert Johansson, also 24 years old, second-round pick in 2019, coming off his first season with the club. Not really an offensive defenseman, although he had a couple of goals that you were like, whoa, what was that there? He did show signs that maybe down the road he could be a middle pairing guy for Detroit. Where do you think he fits into the long-term plan, and what does the contract look like for him?
I think if Albert Johansson's on the third pairing, you're very happy. Detroit has good defensive depth right now with Edvinsson and Seider and Sandin Pellikka coming along, and then I'm sure they'll find someone else for the top 4. But if you look at the bottom pair, and there's Albert Johansson, there's Anton Johansson, there's William Wallinder, Shai Buium. You can have 2 of those players, penciled into the bottom pair. You're pretty happy. And I think Albert Johansson, he came a long way since the start of the season. He's not an overly offensive player, like you said, but he makes the smart play on a pretty consistent basis, and he's good at retrieving pucks and getting it out of the zone. So there's definitely some utility there. And it's just a matter of, can he maybe get a little stronger and adapt to the game and kind of make some plays where he's outthinking the opposition instead of trying to go through them, or because he's not going to be an overly physical player or anything like that. It's just, if he can be a smart player, it doesn't matter what size he is. But as far as his next contract goes, I think it's tough because you're basing this negotiation off of one NHL season, and he had 9 points in 61 games. The thing is, some of his underlying stats and how he compared on a per 60 basis with other players, he actually had some pretty strong comparables. And one of them was Mikey Anderson of the Kings back from the 2022-23 season. And if you recall, Anderson, that following offseason, signed an 8-year, $4.125 million AAV contract with the Kings. Now, these are 2 different players, but the fact that Johansson he has a comparable of that stature, I think that's a good thing for the future. Now, what does that mean for his next deal? Probably be something shorter, 1 year or 2 years. Again, not a lot of leverage in his situation, apart from, threatening to go to arbitration. But I don't think he'd have a strong case in arbitration either. So I think the Red Wings are going to kind of get what they want in terms of a contract here. And I'm looking at something like 2 years and $1.2 million per year.
Obviously, he had to be on the team this year, or the Red Wings risk losing him onto the waivers. But what would you say? Did he meet your expectations, or what were your expectations for him heading into this past season?
I just wanted him to swim. It's like a sink or swim situation for him. He's up with the NHL club, and either he adapts or he doesn't. And I think he did a pretty good job. It took a little bit to get his feet under him, but he really did thrive once Todd McClellan and Trent Yawney took over. So I guess expectations were kind of low just because he had never played an NHL game before. And I think I was pleasantly surprised with how things turned out. Altogether, I think he had a pretty average season. Like, it wasn't anything like super special, but he was fine. And fine is good in his case.
Yeah, 24 years old now. I think he could be a decent player in the bottom pairings for the Red Wings moving forward. And for me, expectations for him, where I think he surpassed my expectations, not that they were high, like you said, but I thought he fit in well. He showed he can play in this league. There were the rookie mistakes from time to time, absolutely. But he did show some flashes that he could be a very good defenseman in this league. And if he turns out, I think that would be great. And I totally agree with you on probably a 2 to 3 year deal for him. And it definitely won't be something that will really construe the Red Wings as a big hit so far. So I'm a fan of Albert Johansson moving forward. The sample size is too small, but let's see what he brings this next season.
And you know what? Former Red Wings defenseman Nick Jensen has carved out a nice career playing a very similar role as a similarly sized player. You can be a small, suffocating defenseman, just being in the right place at the right time, suppressing shots, getting in passing lanes. Like, you can make a career out of that. And I think that's the trajectory that we want to see from Albert Johansson.
Up next, Elmer Soderblom. He was somewhat of a pleasant surprise for Detroit this season, although in a very small sample size once again. 6'8", 23-year-old Swede played in only 26 games, registering 4 goals and 7 assists. A 6th-round pick in 2019 showed that he could play a physical game as well this past season. And he also chipped in here and there on the offensive side. We saw some pretty cool goals out of him. As I said, a restricted free agent. What does his future look like for the long term of this team?
Honestly, kind of in the same realm as Jonatan Berggren, because if you look at the team of the future, there's Danielson, there's Marco Kasper, there's Michael Bronsag-Nygaard, there's Lucas Raymond, Dylan Larkin. You know, those are the players that are going to be in the top 6. And I'm sure there's going to be another player up there with them that's pretty talented player, whether it's Alex DeBrincat or someone else. But that means that Elmer Soderblom's playing in the bottom 6 somewhere, probably 3rd line, and that's a good place to slot him based on his talent level. I'd like to see him get a little bit meaner on the ice. But again, I think for someone of his talent level, if you're deploying him on the 3rd line or 4th line, that's a good thing to have if you're the Red Wings. Now, given his size, given his talent, he might be an interesting trade chip as well. And you got to think about it this way. It's like, you love these players like Soderblom and Carter Mazur and Amadeus Lombardi and all these prospects, but like, you're not going to be a top 6 forward or a top 4 defenseman. In theory, you should be expendable. Now, I'm not advocating for the Red Wings to go out and deal Soderblom this offseason or anything like that, but I think he might be an intriguing trade chip. As far as his next contract goes, he also had some great comparables like Johansson. But the thing was that, like you said, he only played in 26 games this season, not because of an injury and not because he was in the stands. He was in Grand Rapids, and there were other players who were brought up before him. Now, when he got called up, he performed pretty well, and that's good on him. But in a contract year where he's eligible for arbitration, you're looking at his NHL history, and he has 19 points in 47 games. Now, if you're his agent, that's not really great to work with. He has great comparables on a per 60 basis, and if you extrapolate that across a full season, but that just wasn't reality. So I don't think going to arbitration would be a good situation for him. I can kind of see him following the same route as Berggren last year and Veleno the year before that, just taking a 1-year prove-it deal, and then being restricted free agent again next season or next offseason and going from there. So I'm only going to go with 1 year for Soderblom right now and about $1.15 million. There's a chance he gets a little bit more than that, but I think since the Red Wings have the upper hand here, it's going to be a little lower than expected.
I'm still intrigued by his potential at 23 years old and the size, which is something you can't teach. Watching him be a more physical presence on the ice this year, I thought was very encouraging for Detroit. I don't know where that is long-term with this team. And yes, I think he could be a trade chip if it meant bringing in a name that you really needed to throw in a decent prospect with, because I still do think he's a decent prospect. And again, watching the Stanley Cup playoffs, it's the size and strength is something that every team is looking for. And I always feel like Soderblom is while the sample size is small, I feel like he could blossom into what they had hoped Michael Rasmussen had hoped to be. I still am intrigued by that size. 6'8" on the ice, that reach he has. I think there's a spot for him on this team, and I definitely agree that it's obviously in the bottom six, but I still like what I see out of him. I think there's something there left to get out of. Last guy, and this is the only unrestricted free agent we are hitting on, and it's Patrick Kane, who we all know, the 36-year-old winger. Speculation is that he wants to stay in Detroit. Played last year on a 1-year, $4 million deal. We all know what Kane brings to this team, a lot of offense and not much from a defensive standpoint. He had 59 points in 72 games last season, turning 37 in November. How much does he have left in the tank, and what do you think a contract's going to look like for Kane?
When you look at the 2024-25 season, it showed that Kane can play a full year and look pretty solid all throughout. Now, like, this isn't prime Patrick Kane by any means. Like you said, he's 36 and he's turning 37 in November. But the fact that he suited up for 72 of the 82 games and produced almost 60 points, like, that's pretty good. And again, this is like one of the best passers in the game, one of the best passers in the last 25 years. And there's a reason why, like, he did so well. He knows exactly where to be, and he knows exactly where the other players are going to be. And I do think that he is the reason, or one of the main reasons, why Detroit's power play has been so successful over the last 2 years. His vision and playmaking, and that rubbing off on Detroit's good young players, like especially Lucas Raymond. That's definitely something you want to have around. So if you go back to his end of year press conference, there was definitely an interest in coming back. Mentioned, his son and DeBrincat's son being, close, and his son playing youth hockey there, and not wanting to, move his family again. And I do think there's sincere interest in coming back. And I do think the Red Wings would want to have him back. He is a key player in their top six. And I think having him around for another year at least would be beneficial for the team. So what does that look like in terms of a new contract? Last offseason, we weren't quite sure if he was going to re-sign with the Red Wings. He ended up signing a 1-year deal that was $4 million in terms of base salary and up to $2.5 million in performance bonuses. Now, he could do this because it was a 35-plus contract. And I had heard around that same time that there were discussions about a 3-year contract with Kane. While there was interest from both sides in that, they ultimately landed on a 1-year deal, just probably to play it safe. It's possible they go that same route again and just play it safe. I think the only difference this year would be the base salary would be a little higher with the salary cap going up. So maybe $4.5 million instead of $4 million. And then another $2 or $2.5 million in performance bonuses in a similar structure as what you saw this past season. So with performance bonuses, like, they don't count against the cap up front, but if you hit them, then you can use, cap space that you've accrued to pay for them, or it can carry over to the next season, like a little bit's doing this coming year. But I think that's a fair deal if you go another 1-year deal with Kane.
I love that you used Archie as one of the main bargaining points for him to stay. I love that kid. He's got the greatest smile. God, who doesn't love Archie? And I don't think anybody wants to see Showtime leaving this team, but he also has been a defensive liability. You're not going to get much out of him defensively. And I think at this point in his career, he's kind of more of a power play specialist, as he doesn't move like he used to. And not that he ever was a big defensive guy. But I think, again, as you said, it's great for the organization to have someone like him, of his caliber, of his experience, with all these young players coming up. I mean, he's definitely a great guy to lean on in that locker room for these young kids coming up. And he's still got it at 36 years old. And we saw what Sidney Crosby did. And I still think he could get a year or two out of him, and maybe there is a playoff run in the next 2 years with this team, and he's one of the spark plugs and leaders for that.
You're right. And he's not like a Selke trophy candidate by any means, but I was actually, I wouldn't say impressed, but he exceeded my expectations in terms of his defensive performance this past year. Like looking at his micro stats and some of his underlying numbers wasn't great, but it wasn't god awful. It was in between, and that's fine for me.
Now we're going to pivot and let's get to our prospect profile. As I told you, Devin was so great to pre-record this for us. And this week we're going to look at Cole Reschny, a 5'10 forward who played last season with Victoria Royals of the WHL. 62 games, put up 92 points. A lot of the mock drafts I've seen lately have this guy moving up the board. I know you've mentioned him several times, Tony, as one of your favorites, but now Devin's going to dive a little deeper into Cole Reschny and if he's an option for the Red Wings at pick number 13.
So with the Red Wings sitting at 13th overall in the first round of this year's draft, there's actually a handful of guys that, for one reason or another, I know I'd be very comfortable seeing the Red Wings call and take with that pick. I obviously have been more enthused about some and obviously intrigued by others, but this is another one of those guys who we're talking about today that I think fits in the camp of you got to be very excited if he's the Red Wings pick. We're talking about forward Cole Reschny, who played this past season with the Victoria Royals of the Western Hockey League. Really exciting, very attentive forward. A little undersized at 5'10". Of course, with that comes all the usual concerns about how his size is going to limit him or whether or not it will limit him as he climbs up and becomes a pro. And unfortunately, that's going to follow him until he proves it wrong. So, but looking aside from that, another concern with this player, and I guess starting things off a little bad here, but don't worry, this gets good. Reschny doesn't have super high end speed. He's not exactly a speedster. And when you have a player who's a little undersized, you typically want to see them compensate for their lack of size with high end speed, and that's not the case with Reschny here. However, that being said, don't get me wrong, he's not a bad skater. I think that he's probably average. That's probably the best way you could describe it. He's not, he's not going to be necessarily leading the charge like a Dylan Larkin, but he can keep up, and how he keeps up is really kind of the allure of him as a prospect. He thinks the game very fast, and he plays the game fast. There's a difference between being fast and playing fast. And in order to play fast, you have to be able to think ahead and kind of already see the play developing as it's happening in front of you. Reschny has the ability to see that. You see that. All you have to do is really just watch some of the highlight clips you see online of Reschny, and you see that ability. He sees players driving the net, and he can hit them with a feeding pass. He gets to all the open areas and goes where the rebound's going to be to make it home. He anticipates the play very well, and that's what made him such a high-end offensive producer this season with the Royals. He did have 26 goals and 66 assists for 92 points in 62 games this season. That's just a tick over assist per game. That definitely speaks to the level of playmaker he is. And they followed that up with 25 points in 11 playoff games. That's absolutely ridiculous, regardless of what level he's playing at. This is a player that, like I said, I called him attentive, and one of the reasons why is he very much thinks about the game and what's happening at both ends of the ice. There's a reason the Red Wings have reportedly met with this player and are interested in him. He definitely has those two-way. He has the predisposition of a two-way player. He's active, whether the puck's in the offensive zone or in the defensive zone. He's in the middle of everything. He's another one of those players that wants to be in on everything his team does. He does not want to be seen as a liability in the defensive end. And for his to his credit, I wouldn't say he is. I think that he has a good foundation to be a player that can be that you're not going to be necessarily worried about when he's on the ice in defensive situations. Maybe not, looking forward 3, 4, 5 years. Maybe not a player you look at as a penalty killer, but a player that again you can rely on in his own end. Having said that, players that kind of come to mind when I look at this player, honestly, I kind of think of a morph of two guys. One of them being Red Wings prospect Nate Danielson, obviously a playmaking centerman that pays attention and plays well and focuses and is active at both ends of the ice. I see a lot of that. Reschny wore a letter this year with the Victoria Royals, and that kind of calls back to when Nate Danielson was a captain in his days in the WAHL. And then another player I kind of also think of when I look at Reschny is Zach Benson, the player for the Buffalo Sabres, who was their top pick in the 2023 draft. Another guy who's kind of defined by his lack of size, but just high-end skill. And maybe the thing that Reschny has over Benson here is that Reschny is kind of he's very much seen as a center right now, whereas Benson was seen as a winger. Having said that, given his lack of size and lack of speed, I would say there's definitely a decent chance that Reschny is a winger when he is an NHL player. Having said that, that's not necessarily a bad thing as far as the Red Wings are concerned. They have Nate Danielson in the system. They have Marco Kasper, Dylan Larkin, a few other center prospects as well. So if they pick Reschny and he doesn't end up being a centerman, he ends up being a winger, that's totally fine. They have the depth to compensate for that. Heck, maybe even if they are picking him, that's what they would prefer him to be anyways. But point is this is the player that has the possibility and the potential to be a really solid, potentially high-end offensive player. The processor and motor on this kid is it gives him the potential to be maybe one of the more underrated players in this class, and it's one of the reasons why I would say if the Red Wings do pick him at 13th overall, you got to be excited. This kid, don't let his lack of size fool you. He's got all the talent in the world, and his point totals and his ability to make his teammates better and really create, no matter what the situation was, really kind of emphasize that this season.
All right. Thanks, Devin. That's great stuff. Now, moving along, Red Wings signed another goaltender this week, which kind of came out of nowhere, signing Czech goaltender Michal Postava to a 2-year entry-level contract. Postava led HC Kometo Brno to the Czech Extraliga Championship this past season. Tony, what are your thoughts about this being our goaltending guru, and where does he fit in the organization as far as goaltending depth?
So there had been some speculation that the Red Wings would be signing Arvid Holm from the SHL, but that was never official. It was reported that it was going to happen, but maybe never did. Maybe it fell through. Anyway, the Red Wings signed Michal Postava out of Czechia's top league. He kind of burst onto the scene this year. He ended up winning the championship, so he can definitely play, that's for sure. Where do I see him fitting? I think this is one of those situations where you go into training camp, you have more than likely Sebastian Costa starting the year in Grand Rapids as a starter, and then you have Postava and Carter Gylander battling out to see who would be the other goalie on the Griffins. And now, being the backup on an AHL team isn't exactly a backup. It's usually one of those like 1A, 1B situations, just because there are so many games on back-to-back nights, and you don't want to run your starter out, 2 nights in a row that often. So whoever is in Grand Rapids with Costa, they'll probably end up playing in 30, 35 games at least. So they'll definitely get quite a bit of ice time. But it's a 2-year deal. How I see it playing out is Postava and Costa this year in Grand Rapids, and the next year it's Postava and Trey Augustine. So gives the Griffins some consistency. It removes one thing from Yzerman's to-do list for this offseason and potentially next offseason as well. Yeah, curious to see how things turn out as he transitions to North American ice.
And we've got more news on Red Wings prospect Dmitri Buchelnikov that has occurred in the last 12 hours at the time of this recording. He was traded from his team Vitez, who we mentioned may have had some financial issues, to CSKA Moscow in a big KHL shakeup. Tony, what else can you tell us about his situation? And are we any closer to seeing this guy in a Red Wings uniform?
It's kind of status quo from where we were 2 weeks ago before everyone got all spun up. His contract is through the 2025-26 season. He's just going to go to a better team, play in a better organization alongside better players. So probably good for his development. And, after their season wraps up, he's free to come over to the NHL or to the AHL, depending on where the organization sees a better fit for him. Now, the KHL, it's kind of weird. You players typically can't leave their clubs until the season is fully over, like through the championship and such. But as we saw with Ivan Demidov and Alexander Nikishin this past year, teams can work something out where they can get those players over a little earlier. So, he'll play out his year and we'll go from there. And hopefully he'll be in Detroit or Grand Rapids in May or June next year, if not in the fall.
Still only 20 years old. I know there's a lot of hype behind him, but he's still got time to develop. But what we've seen so far from him in the KHL is very encouraging. He also will probably get a lot more exposure with higher profile club with CSKA Moscow. It's the summer, so the rumor mill has been spinning. Tony, I know you saw some names this week that might have interest for the Detroit Red Wings, and some names that you've mentioned here in the past that you think would be a good fit in the wing wheel. Please discuss one of the latest ones you heard this week that you like.
Yeah, so the fourth period reported that the Red Wings had expressed interest in Nic Hague, left-handed defenseman from the Vegas Golden Knights. He was actually one of my trade targets for the team, so glad I was onto something there. But so Vegas is looking at potentially moving him out. He's a pending restricted free agent. And doing so to open up some cap space on their end. They're kind of tight up against the cap right now. And Jack Eichel will be eligible for an extension on July 1st. The last year of his contract is next season. So they want to make sure they have some space for doing so. Obviously, they have Noah Hannafin, Alex Pietrangelo, Shea Theodore, and also Brayden McNabb playing a key role in the team. So Hague has kind of flown under the radar a little bit. But there are, a lot of things to like about his game. Like as I mentioned, he's 6'6". He's a big defenseman. He can play mean. He's won a cup with the Golden Knights. On top of that, while his point totals aren't super high, he does have a good offensive mindset. He had pretty good numbers in juniors, and playing in a lesser role with Vegas, it hasn't quite translated to the score sheet yet. But he is that type of player who, put somewhere else in the top four, he can seriously thrive. Now, his micro stats for D-zone retrievals and exits they're so not super great when it comes to D-zone denials, but it's one of those things. He's one of those players where like the sum of the parts is greater than the whole. So I do think that he can bring a needed element to Detroit's blue line and fit into the top four nicely moving into the future. I don't think he'll cost too much, like a second round pick maybe, or a cheap forward plus a third round pick maybe. I would be shocked if the Vegas got a first round pick for him or that caliber of player. But we'll see how things turn out. We'll see how desperate they are to create some cap space. Now, the other player that was mentioned by the fourth period was Vladimir Tarasenko, and that probably shouldn't come as a surprise, given that he was on the trade block around the deadline, wanted a change of scenery, but the Red Wings just couldn't find the right situation for him. From what I've heard, they really did try, and just they weren't getting any offers that made sense for the team. They weren't going to be partying with assets just to move him. That didn't make sense at the time. So now that teams are engaging with one another and trying to bolster their team and make changes, Yzerman's back on the phone trying to see what he can do for Tarasenko to find a better situation for him. Now, I don't see the Red Wings parting with assets to get rid of him. I think if that's the only thing that's out there in terms of a trade, then a buyout would be more likely. If the Red Wings went that route, it would be 1.58 million over the next 2 years. So you can kind of use that as ballpark how much money the Red Wings might be willing to retain to get rid of Tarasenko if that was requested by another team. That said, I do think if the Red Wings are going to retain money, they should at least be getting something back for using that cap space. But if not, a buyout would be perfectly fine too. I personally think that he'll be moved one way or another before the season starts, but time will tell.
Yeah, it's hard not to say that wasn't a disappointing transaction last year with him joining the club. It just wasn't the right fit. And it sucks to see because he was once a great player, but his style and just did not fit in the Detroit Red Wings system, and I can't see him coming back with this team this season. It was reported that he didn't mesh well. He was basically signed with the team with Derek Lalonde as the head coach, and now with McClellan in, there's not a fit there for me, and I think the Red Wings got to move him out. If it's buyout or move, I don't know what value he has. I think his value is probably at the lowest it's ever been in his career at this point. But Eisman's going to have to work the phones and work some magic to move on from him and his deal.
One way or another, I wouldn't be surprised if he ended up in Toronto just because his former head coach, Craig Berube, is there.
And who else is there?
Yeah, I mean, but between Berube and Lalonde, I think that would probably be a good fit for him. It's a good opportunity for him to revitalize his career a little bit. But that's just my prediction. If he is out of Detroit in whatever fashion, I think he'll end up in Toronto. That's just place that bet now.
All right, guys. Well, that'll do it for episode 39. Devin, really appreciate you doing our prospect profile, and we missed you on today's episode. But with that, let me remind you real quick where you can find us: iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcast. Give us a follow on Twitter at Flying Octopod, and follow our YouTube channel at The Flying Octopod. Leave us the comments, any notes, any questions, anything that you want us to get into. The draft is just about 2 weeks away. Today's the 12th, so it's on the 27th. So we're going to be pumping out some draft prospect profiles individually to our Twitter site and to our YouTube page. So if you want to get some information there, and if there's any prospects you do want us to get to, please drop us a note. We'd really appreciate it, and even give us a like and a review. So with that, I thank you for watching the Flying Octopus Podcast, and we'll see you again next week. Thanks for watching.
Thanks for listening to the Flying Octopus Podcast. Follow us on YouTube at the Flying Octopus channel and Twitter at Flying Octopod.